Aron Ralston kept himself alive for 6 days with intense self-control and the conviction that only logical thought could allow him to survive. However, the 27-year-old climber's insight about how he could save his own life came from an outpouring of wild wrath. Ralston was alone in Utah's small valleys when a loosened boulder landed on his right arm, trapping him against a rock. He was buried in the Blue John Canyon wilderness, carrying a small knapsack with only 1 liter of water, 2 burritos, and a few chunks of chocolate. He had headphones and a video camera, but no phone, and there was no reception. Worst of all, he hadn't told anyone where he was going. He eked out his water by futilely chipping away at the 800-pound rock and gradually becoming insane, until he was compelled to hack off his trapped arm with a little knife from his inexpensive multi-tool kit. Ralston, now 35 and still with the wiry frame of a climber, recently attended the London premiere of Danny Boyle's film 127 Hours, which chronicles his amazing escape from impending death. The picture, like Ralston himself, is full of boyish enthusiasm, adds Ralston, speaking swiftly and flailing his arms around animatedly. However, it does not adequately depict his gruesome moment of enlightenment. Ralston feared there was no way he could perform the horrific amputation that would save his life after his blunt knife punctured his flesh, but came to rest against firm bone. When he brushed some dirt off his stuck thumb, a piece of flesh peeled off like the skin of boiled milk, he recalls. I'm like, what the hell? I take my knife and poke a little more, and the knife just glides into the meat of my thumb like room temperature butter. My hand has nearly jellified. The knife point is inserted, and PSSSTT, the gases from decomposition escape, leaving a rotten odor. I am enraged. I'm in this hyper-emotional state as a result of all this discipline to keep it together, and just as I'm about to yank my arm out of the rock, I feel it bend and halt me. That's it. I can crush my bones with the boulder. Ralston purposefully snapped the bones in his arm by flinging himself frantically against the boulder, eventually allowing him to cut through his limb with a blunt knife, rather than calm logic. It's not unexpected that viewers have reacted emotionally, fainting in auditoriums as Ralston, masterfully played by James Franco in the film, he's nominated for a Golden Globe, begins his amputation. Despite what may be called an unimpressive climax for mainstream entertainment, made even more unimpressive by the fact that most people know exactly what will happen, this moment is riveting, without Boyle being overly graphic. And, despite repeating the narrative for the umpteenth time, Ralston is immensely riveting, thoroughly entering the moment again, miming out what he did by making a severe stabbing motion with his good arm into what is now a dark gray prosthetic limb. In the film, Franco's Ralston is a hyperactive, overconfident loner who feels he is invincible as he races about Blue John Canyon, shamelessly showing off to a pair of female hikers he meets and, jackass style, photographing himself when he crashes off his mountain bike. That's so you, Ralston, friends have told him, but if his portrayal on film was true to his life then, Ralston is certainly much more likable now. The year before his accident, Ralston quit his job as an engineer with Intel to climb all Colorado's 14ers, its peaks over 14,000 feet. In May 2003, he began canyoneering in Utah, navigating the narrow passages of Blue John with a mixture of free climbing, daring jumps, and climbing with ropes. He was negotiating a 10-foot drop in a 3-feet-wide canyon listening to his favorite band, Fish, when he dislodged a boulder he thought was stable. I go from being out on a lark in a beautiful place and just being so happy and carefree to, like, oh shit. I fell a few feet, in slow motion. I look up and the boulder is coming and I put my hands up and try to push myself away and it collides and crushes my right hand. Ralston was pinned in the canyon, his right hand and lower arm crushed by the 800-pound rock. There was this stunned moment of what he laughs. And it's almost comic. The agony struck the following second. If you've ever accidentally crushed your finger in a door, he recalls, this was 100 times worse. For 45 minutes, he cursed like a pirate in an adrenaline-fueled rage. Then he grabbed his water bottle. He had to force himself to stop drinking. I realize that this water is the only thing that will keep me alive, he says. He knew he wouldn't be found because he hadn't told anyone where he was going. I put the lid back on the water bottle and gathered myself. It was like, all right, brute force isn't going to do it. This is the stop, think, observe, plan phase of rational problem solving. I have to think my way out of here. As he describes how he thought through his options, he taps his prosthetic arm on his fingers. He ruled out the most drastic option, suicide, but the next most drastic alternative came to him immediately. There's this surreal conversation with myself. Aron, you're gonna have to cut your arm off. I don't want to cut my arm off. Dude, you're gonna have to cut your arm off. I said it to myself. That little back and forth. Then, wait a minute. Stop. I'm not talking to myself. That's just crazy. You're not talking to yourself, Aron. Except I would continue to talk to myself in various ways, to remind myself not to pass out. After 2 days spent fruitlessly chipping away at the rock with his knife and devising a clever but futile system of pulleys with his climbing clips and ropes to hoist the boulder clear, he was defeated because climbing rope is stretchy and he couldn't obtain the required tension. He put his knife to his arm, only to find it was so blunt he couldn't even cut his body hair. In Boyle's film, when Ralston realizes he can use the knife like a dagger rather than a saw, the camera follows the knife's journey into his flesh so the audience can see blade come to rest against bone inside his arm. This scene is beautiful to Ralston. He vividly remembers how it felt to have the knife in his arm, touching his bone, because it meant, I'm gonna die. It went from, I did it, to, oh, I'm going to die here. I could no more chip through that bone than I would be able to excavate the rock to free my hand. By the 5th day, Ralston had found peace in the knowledge that I am going to die here, this is my grave. In the middle of his final night, hallucinating through hunger, lack of water and 3°C temperatures, he had a vision of a small boy. I see myself in this out-of-body experience playing with him with a handless right arm. I see myself scoop him up and there's this look in his eyes, Daddy, can we play now? That look tells me this is my son, this is in the future, I'm gonna have this experience someday. Now it's like, I am going to get through this night. The next morning, finally, came the rage and its revelation, that Ralston could fling himself against the boulder to break his own bones. From then, it was easy. The snap of his bones like, pow, was a horrifying sound but to me it was euphoric, he recalls. The detachment had already happened in my mind, it's rubbish, it's going to kill you, get rid of it Aron. It's an it. It's no longer my arm. As I picked up the knife, I was very cool and collected. It took him an hour to hack through his flesh. As painful as it all was, the momentum of the euphoria was driving it, he says. It is striking in Ralston's own book, and in Franco's portrayal in the film, just how curiously unemotional he is about his predicament, which he views not self-pityingly nor self-critically, but simply as a series of problems to be solved. When asked why the epiphany that leads to his freedom came through anger and not his more characteristic rational thought, Ralston gives a particularly good answer. The lesson is that resilience is about flexibility. It's not just about exercising your strengths, he says, flexing his good arm, it's also about exercising what aren't your strengths. At this point, he flexes his prosthetic arm. I'm a very analytical and rational person, very mind-centered in my life, and yet here's this way I was very heart-centered, both finding my strength and finding the solution. It didn't have anything to do with logic, it had to do with the sensation, the feeling of the bone just bending in a really weird way. Then it became a thought, I can break my bones. In the canyon, Ralston calculated it would take him at least 10 hours to find medical help and he would bleed to death, but, using pieces of climbing kit as a tourniquet, he strapped himself up and somehow managed to scale a 65-foot cliff to escape the canyon. Exposed to the fierce sun, he was found by 3 Dutch tourists who gave him water and helped him stagger on, before he was picked up by a search and rescue helicopter dispatched by his family to look for him. Watching these scenes on film, that's where I start getting all weepy-eyed, says Ralston, because when I see that helicopter what I'm seeing is my mom, because she made the rescue happen. Where Ralston is radically different today, in the flesh, compared with his pre-accident self as portrayed by Franco in the film, is in his recognition that he depends on other people. The love of others, his relationships with his family and friends, kept him alive, he says now. It was very much a spiritual experience and different from Joe Simpson in Touching the Void. The tool that connected him to other people's love was his camera. It's like this lifeline to the outer world, to other living beings, to love. That's what kept me alive. He recorded his last will and testament in a series of video diaries during his entombment, so it is nicely symbolic that his ordeal has been made into a film. Although he played his videos to his parents, he decided he would never allow them to be shown in public. Instead, many of Franco's monologues exactly replicate what Ralston said in his own personal videos. Boyle shot 127 hours at the exact spot where Ralston had the accident, but added some fictional scenes, such as when he splashes in a secret pool with the women he meets before the accident. The reality, helping them with a few basic climbs, was much more prosaic. Ralston was uncomfortable with these at first, but belatedly understood that such changes enabled the audience to experience it in a truthful way and did not undermine the authenticity promised by Boyle. The movie is so factually accurate it is as close to a documentary as you can get and still be a drama, he says. I think it's the best film ever made. He has watched it 8 times and cried every time. The vision that Ralston had during his final night in the canyon has come true. Earlier this year, Ralston's wife, Jessica, gave birth to a baby boy, Leo. Ralston admits to moments of frustration with his prosthetic arm but sees it as his salvation. It was me getting my life back, he says. After the exhilaration of the rescue, you might expect Ralston to suffer depression. He did not, at least, not immediately. Fearing the loss of my identity as a self-reliant individual, as an outdoorsman, he regained all of that. He completed his mission to conquer the 14ers, rode a boat through the Grand Canyon and is a better climber now than when he had a right hand. Many people would find this adaptation to disability as inspiring as his escape, but Ralston is honest enough to admit the downside of the fact that this supposedly life-changing experience did not actually change his life as perhaps it should. What did I do? In the years following my amputation I thought, I won't let it change me. I just want to be the guy I was before and prove that I am still this hard hero. It's almost pathetic to the extent that what I really needed was a humbling, and what happened? I just got reinforced. I'm a fucking badass. I just got out of that. Nothing's gonna stop me. He lowers his voice. But I was ultimately humbled actually through a relationship, a girl who broke up with me. It was not the loss of his right arm but this breakup, in 2006, that caused a really deep depression. He felt crushed to the core, he says, and began questioning whether he was worth anything if he was not lovable. Belatedly, he realized that it was love and relationships that lead you to strength and confidence and courage and perseverance and everything that people attribute to this story. In the aftermath of his depression, he met his wife and she challenged him to implement what I'd learned, that relationships are really very important in life and this is how to transform from being this ego-driven 20-something into being, if possible, on a path at least to becoming a more mature guy. Ralston still likes solitude, but when he goes out rafting and climbing now, he almost always takes his friends. In Blue John Canyon, he also has a literal touchstone, the rock that crushed and trapped him. He still visits it. I touch it and go back to that place, remembering when I thought about what's important in life, relationships, and this quest to want to get out of there and return to love and relationships, he says, to return to freedom instead of entrapment.